Hello, everyone, and welcome to our exciting event today where we're going to talk about persona driven security and how zero trust applies. We're going to talk about the risks and rewards and how persona adoption is the primary and your best option to securely enable artificial intelligence. My name is Rob Lamagna Ryder, and I'm pleased to present with Chris Vermelia. I'm the CISO at Woodman Life, and Chris is the VP of Services at Loom Security.
Awesome. Thank you, Rob. And I'll add my good afternoon to everyone as well. Appreciate you jumping in with us. A lot to cover. So just as a couple, headlights where we're headed here, we want to talk through a little bit that risk and value proposition that Rob just mentioned when we talk about AI. How can we do this in a way that makes sense? How can we do this in a way that's going to enable our businesses to do what they want to do, but allow us as security practitioners to still do what we need to do? We'll talk through the persona framework in terms of how we present that and how we feel is the best approach that could move that forward. Give you a couple scenarios, a couple now what's, after we learn some information, and then we want to leave you with a couple things to take it with you, all while spinning zero trust into this conversation as well. So that being said, we're gonna jump in here. They always say, right, start with a crazy stat. So, I actually used AI to pull this stat. 89% of enterprise AI usage goes unseen by IT and security teams. Believe it or not, that's not the point. But seriously, think about AI in your organization. Most customers, most people, most teams that we talk to would agree that AI is out there, right? It's moving forward, whether we're ready for it or not. And most likely it's used even further than we even realize. So we're left with the question on the security side of what are we going to do about it? Traditionally, unfortunately, we get this reputation sometimes of being the department of no. New things come along, we try and help, but ultimately it doesn't meet requirements or doesn't fit into our framework. And so we're left saying, sorry, we can't do that. And ultimately what happens is what this picture shows. We are the gatekeeper and we put that gate down, and the business oftentimes just find a ways around it. They just go around the controls, whether it's intentional or sometimes unintentional. And so ultimately we're left holding the bag, trying to put things back in the box after they're already gone. And that is certainly true when we look at AI as well. Our business teams are going around the controls that we try and put in place in order to get what they need. So what does that mean to us? We don't want to just be the department of no, but how can we do this in a way that allows the business to do what they need to do? So before we talk about that, let's back up a step. Realistically speaking, when we think about AI, what's the risk? What's really at stake here as we look down this path and at this journey? First and foremost, we talk a lot about garbage in, garbage out. AI is very powerful, can do a lot of different things, but ultimately it's fed by the data we put into it, or that it finds in the case of some of these public models, and it spits something out the other end. And a lot of times our business users don't understand or don't think about the fact that what they're pulling out of these models is only as good as what's going into it. Now that gets into data privacy issues and things like that we'll talk about here in a minute. But even before we get there, back up a step. Do our business users, do our teams understand that this is only as good as what's being fed in? Garbage in, garbage out. We need to make sure that that's addressed first and foremost. On the security side, we take that to the next level. We talk about data privacy. We talk about model bias, the fact that what's going into that, again, garbage in, garbage out, may seem fine, but if we train it too far or it's trained incorrectly, we're left with a mess. There's a use case a couple years ago, Microsoft set up more of a chatbot than anything else. This is going back a few years, but it was meant to simulate, a teenage girl that was meant to just be there for conversations, interact, ask questions, things like that. Unfortunately, there were malicious actors that got a hold of that chatbot. It was still in a learning phase, and they just fed a whole bunch of garbage into it. And Microsoft had to ultimately pull the thing offline in less than 24 hours. It was spitting out, racist comments and things like that really just took it off the rails, all because it was unfettered training, a model bias. On the security space, we also look at the unmonitored use of platforms like this, and we'll spend time talking about this today. Shadow AI, unapproved tools, things like that pop into our environments that we're stuck trying to manage. And unfortunately, there's no going back. The horse is out of the barn when it comes to AI, and we have to figure out, what are we going to do about it? How can we support this in a way that in some cases we're behind the eight ball, in other cases we're viewed as that department of no. So if we look at this holistic picture, the risks around AI, we're stuck kind of looking at this going, well, geez, is it worth it? Is it as bad as it seems? And we have to figure that out. So from my perspective, as our friend Han Solo kind of said it best, it is true, all of it, the dark side. But the Jedi is too. They're real. There are ways that we can do this in a way that allow our organizations and our teams to be able to tackle this AI beast in a way that we can get the value out of it. So let's flip that. What's the value of something like this? We talk a lot about, the ways that we can look at the value that AI gives us, both promised and in a lot of cases realized. There are good things that are coming from this. We look at efficiency and productivity, and we look at routine tasks. We look at decision making. We look at some of these things that we can trust a little bit to the automation, and we can get a lot of gains from it. You hear a lot about the job market right now. A lot of these entry-level jobs have been moved to AI, which is really just advanced automation in some cases, but there is value there. We look at innovation. Can we differentiate our products and our tools and our services in a way that other people can't, because we now have additional horsepower in a lot of cases to be able to understand the value of a tool like this? Intelligence. A lot of BI teams are looking at AI to be able to drive intelligence in ways we didn't think about before or we couldn't do before. Instead of spinning up new reports, we go into the development cycle, yada, yada, yada. We look at AI to build dynamic reports, in a lot of cases, surface insights we just didn't even think about. There's a lot of value from there, and we see that across different teams. Cost optimization is another big one. We can reduce a lot of effort, a lot of manual use cases, and things like that AI can help us with. And then finally, competitive advantage. From a services space, from a product space, how many products do you have in your organization or your ecosystem, and all of a sudden have a new AI widget, right? It's supposed to help us. It's supposed to gain value. Some cases, yes. Some cases, no. But there is, some value that we can get from there if we do it all the right way. So given the value that could be there, in a lot of cases is there, we're left with a decision. Will we, as the empire, strike back? Will we continue to be the department of no and live up to our reputation? Or can we do this in a way that's going to work for everybody? So ultimately, we're left with this question: how can we enable the secure adoption of AI? And that's what we're going to talk about here today. So I'm going to back us up one more step. I keep saying that, but we are going to get to the top of the stack here eventually. Talk about personas a little bit. What is a persona? From my perspective, a business persona is not just a user and their collection of accounts and entitlements and permissions, but it takes it up a step. What do you functionally do in an organization? That's our job, to protect that person, that persona. So who are we trying to protect? It's our business, right? And you hear that a lot and say, well, yeah, our goal has always been to protect our users. So what's different? What's different about today? We used to do this. Yes, we do it all the time. But then we had to comply with regulations. We aligned to good posture frameworks, and there's a lot of them out there. We added controls to protect the user, to protect the devices that they're on, to protect the networks that they use. And ultimately, we had to become more and more strict with those controls to make sure that the security posture of our organization was strong. And we got pretty good at that. And then the pandemic happened, and we had to get a lot more strict. We had remote users, and so we had to look even further at that persona, at that user, at the device, the network, all those things, to be able to make sure that the security of that person and ultimately what they were trying to do was something we were comfortable with. And we did an okay job of that. It's getting harder, but we tried to do our best. What we forgot about is the user side of this equation. So unfortunately, they're stuck with a lot of friction points that they didn't have before. So they start to look for workarounds. Think about the control gate we looked at earlier. They're actively finding ways to go around some of these controls because it's too many clicks. There's too much friction, too much red tape, and they start hiding things from IT, right? Shadow IT comes into play. People start understanding or looking for ways they don't have to necessarily comply with what the controls are because they have a job to do. And then when they ask for help, we started going down the path of self-service, give them knowledge portals and give them, self-service access requests and attestation reviews and things like that they don't really understand, and they're stuck. They don't have the access to what they need, and in some cases, but at the same time, they have way too much access. And so they're left with a really bad user experience. And so ultimately, that leads in us losing this persona focus. We're now more focused on checking our security boxes than actually helping the user do their job. And that's not where we want to be. And so fast forward back into the AI part of this conversation, our users are finding and using AI because they can and because they want to. And in some cases now they feel they have to. So what do we do? How do we get this back into the box in a way that we can control this safely? And how can we roll this out in adoption that meets our needs as well as security people? From my perspective, Rob and I have talked a lot about this. It comes down to really the control aspects of this. And we can't be Darth Vader here, right? We can't just strangle it to death and hope that nobody uses it, because what we've seen in a lot of cases is, okay, fine. If I can't do it on my corporate laptop, I can do it on my personal cell phone, and I can email it to myself, and I can copy it out and put it in there, and now we have even less control. So we need to get our hands around this. The way we do this is, first of all, look at the use cases. What are your users trying to do? This goes right back to that persona framework we were just talking about in brief. Map those use cases back to the personas. What are they trying to do? What's the purpose of it? And what are the risks or outcomes that they're trying to design around? And so we can build our controls to make sure that it works for what they need. So let's design those controls around that behavior, not just the technology. It may not be a blanket yes, and it certainly may not be a blanket no. What's the middle ground look like? What controls do we have? What options do we have? That will vary by platform, of course, but can we design our controls around that to make sure that it's useful? Secondly, let's align the guardrails with that business intent. Let's understand what it is they're trying to do. Does it make sense? If so, let's put the guardrails in place. It's okay to use some of these things, but not everything is okay. We talked a lot about data privacy a little bit ago. We can't let everything fall into the model and everything can't come out of the model. So let's put the guardrails in place to make sure that it makes sense. Using those persona insights as well, we can prioritize things. And this is the other big piece of this. We can't do everything at once. Our teams aren't big enough. There's not enough hours in the day. So let's align those controls prioritized based on which users or use cases make the most sense and start from there. Starting that elephant, one bite at a time. In doing so, we're ultimately going to build trust, but that has to happen through transparency. You hear this all the time from IT teams. It's not necessarily a black box. Let's tell the users what we're doing. Help them understand why it's not a blanket yes, but also why it's not a blanket no. By doing so, we can tell them how we're helping, get them down that path, build some of that trust, and then move forward. Again, it's not going to happen overnight, so let's just start moving down that path. And finally, we have to adapt. This is not going to be a one-stop shop. We're not going to roll out this program or the controls around it once and be done. We need to be able to continuously move based on the use cases that come up. So this is easy to say in a slide. I get that. We don't have too much time to dive into every one of these, in too much detail. But ultimately, what we want to share with you today is that we can do this. We can start somewhere and we can make progress on this journey. So let's put it in the real world, right? What happens when things are not done the right way and how can we fix it? So I'm going to go back a few years here, and that's on purpose just to show that this is not a new problem and people have found ways to fix it and help down that path, but it is continuously adapting as well. So Air Canada, right, big airline in Canada, had a chatbot in 2022 that ultimately was helping customers answer questions. Pretty straightforward. It had access to a lot of policies that passengers could choose to take advantage of. One of those was, if you needed to get to a funeral for a loved one, they had discounts available. A lot of stipulations with that, but there was a passenger that had purchased a ticket under the assumption that they would qualify for this discount. The chatbot told them they qualified. In that interaction, the chatbot did point the passenger to the specific guideline, but it also specifically said, you qualify for the discount. In that proceeding, the airline determined that the passenger actually did not qualify and therefore did not issue the discount to them, and things went to trial, went to courts. And so there was, the Air Canada side of the equation was that, hey, it's the passenger should have read the policy. Regardless of what the chatbot said, the passenger should have read the policy. Passenger argued that, hey, the chatbot told me it was okay, therefore it's Air Canada's fault. Went all the way through the court system, and ultimately the court ruled in favor of the passenger, saying that Air Canada is responsible for their chatbot and what it says. You can't just say, well, I didn't know what it was doing, it wasn't trained right, it's not on me. Out of that brief came the statement that it makes no difference whether the information comes from a static page or a chatbot. And this was 2022. So this is several years ago at this point. We've made a lot of progress, but that laid the groundwork for a lot of organizations in terms of what our machines, what our chatbots, what our AI models can do. So what do they do about it? What did Air Canada do about this? They established and publicly disclosed their entire governance framework. They built an ethics policy. They covered the full life cycle and made sure that the governance side of AI trickled all the way through every AI model they had. And they actually built personas around it too, because that chatbot can and should have access to some things, but not everything. That chatbot can make some decisions, but not all decisions. And so they put a lot more controls and guardrails in place to make sure that we knew what it could do, what it couldn't do, and how can we move forward from that. They also established a center of excellence around everything AI that they did, using personas to understand the data modeling aspect of it, going in, and also the data mapping coming out in terms of optimizing who had access to what and what decisions the model could make. So they've seen success in things like cargo management, revenue management, flight maintenance scheduling, things like that. Tasks that we're comfortable with, but fall under the controls of the program itself. So all that said, with the example, we're still left with the question, what are we going to do about it? What should you do in your program to make sure you can securely adopt some of these frameworks? One, build your personas. And we recommend starting with those that want to use AI. Look beyond the departments and the job titles. This is not an RBAC exercise. This is understanding how your users actually function within your organization. We look at that across 5 control points that are shown on the screen here. Identity, device, the network, which includes cloud, the target, and ultimately the data. Those points form a context around which you can build a persona and then define the access model around it. But to do that, you do have to talk to the business. Please, seriously, talk to the business. They will help you understand what they're doing, how they're doing it, and where their pain points are. It's really hard and it's really, difficult for us sometimes to get out of that box and talk to users because either we don't think they understand, they're not technical, they don't know what's going on behind the scenes. All that is true, but we also don't understand what they're trying to do, where they're getting stuck, and how they can move forward with it. We need to open this conversation to build these personas accurately. From there, let's build our AI access profiles based on those personas. Goes back to what we were saying before. Those guardrails, those controls can and should be aligned to those persona models. That way we know what you're trying to do and secure that access. By doing so, we'll still check our boxes. We'll still secure the data. We'll still secure the model, but it's done so in a way that supports what the user is trying to do. So I'm going to go back to the Star Wars scene a little bit here, but do you remember what happened before the Empire had to strike back, right? Go back to episode 4 here in New Hope. The Death Star was destroyed right at the end of the movie, but it was destroyed due to a weakness, a fatal flaw that at the time, right, I wasn't there when they designed it, but I can assume was a vulnerability that the designers never thought could be exploited. The chance was so low, the risk was so low, until Luke Skywalker came along with the Force and destroyed the Death Star. That can't be our program. We can't be so concerned that we have a fatal flaw that we just say no to everything, but we can't leave it go either. We have to do this securely. So how do we make it secure? Well, protect the data. And this gets into a little bit of the data security side of AI, but this is on purpose because we want this group to understand that there are some basic pieces that we need to do to enforce and encourage that secure adoption. So one, protect the data, which means you need to know where your data is. And that's usually where a lot of people get stuck because they don't know where everything necessarily is. They don't know how sensitive everything is, and it's not really classified. So there are some baseline pieces we need to do here. Secondly, feed your data, your AI models accordingly. Not everything belongs in there. You look at public models, that's an easy decision. Not everything should go on a public model, of course, especially company data. But even your internal AI engines, be it Copilot or anything else you may be building internally, you need to understand what it has access to. Don't dump everything in there. And that falls into that second point there is making sure that the persona access model follows that data privacy. And there's two sides to that coin. One, like we just talked about, what can the model access, can and should? And two, what can the user access? Your model needs to respect those same boundaries. And so if a user may not be able to have access to everything in the environment, the AI model should not give them things they don't have access to. This goes right back to those 5 control points. We need to build that full identity context to make sure that the persona only has access to what they should, and the model respects that. Third point on here is surface the wins. That's often forgotten. Our businesses give us this reputation of the Department of No because they don't know what's happening. This is a great area where we can tell them, hey, this is what we're working on. Here's where the goals are. Here's what we've been sharing, and here's where we're going to go. Back to that trust build or trust through transparency. The business can benefit from this, but they need to know how, and we need to help them. And so as we look at how we can help people adopt AI in a more secure manner, there are a lot of pieces to it, but these are the foundational points. There are a lot of things that we can learn as we move forward to make sure that this is done the right way. There's a whole other component to this around zero trust that we can weave in here as well. So I'm going to pass it back to Rob at this point, and we're going to talk a little bit about the zero trust aspect of this.
Thanks, Chris. You spoke a lot about the value of personas, how we're going to enable artificial intelligence. One of the hardest parts in this is the fear of failure. It's the actual application of zero trust and applying all of this in the day to day, right? One of the most persistent issues isn't our lack of talent or tools. It's how we struggle to evolve. It's partly because that's how we've been conditioned to think. We're taught to avoid failure at all costs rather than explore what's possible, like the natural evolution of applying personas and identities to implement zero trust to enable artificial intelligence. Going back to the Empire, they didn't stop at that first Death Star, despite that fatal flaw. They kept going. So we have to reframe the conversation to leverage zero trust guided artificial intelligence to supercharge the effectiveness, governance, and scalability of continuing our efforts. We need to focus more on the outcomes, right? Less on the emotions to get a point across. Less on textbook definitions and theories of zero trust, more on actually how to implement it. In information security, a lot of the times where we go and talk to the business, we have a real opposition to expressing emotions, because we think that emotions there and being able to empathize, understand the business, understand how we're selling to our customers and increasing revenue. Emotions are not obstacles. We need to understand, empathize, and really get to the bottom of how the organization's business processes function. The only challenge with it is emotions are not generally designed for long-term consequences. So if you look at security strategies and decisions, this is one of the areas where we want to leverage both emotions and the power of connecting the dots more than ever, because we need to execute and move forward and use reliable and actual information as our leverage points. It starts with shifting orientation. Instead of designing for threats, we need to design for trust, what people need to do their job safely and effectively. We need to move personas that support business processes so that they can enable the key pillars of zero trust. It's all about enablement. It's zero trust like it was designed for artificial intelligence automation scale before it has hit prime time. Instead of rigid controls, those adaptive guardrails based on the personas enable us to proactively guide behavior, right? Artificial intelligence, even agentic AI, even the individuals that the personas are based off of, it's all about behavior across the business processes. And this doesn't mean that we need to abruptly abandon risk management, but we need to finally make it effective by aligning how our organizations actually work and actually use data. Security is about creating an environments where users, whether that's customers or employees, partners, everybody feels safe sharing and building and engaging. Everybody judges organizations based on how credible your operations are. Amazon and Microsoft, when they went down several weeks and months ago, if you think about the impact that had on ongoing operations, they didn't see that it was Amazon or Microsoft. They thought it was your business. So you need to control the digital presence. And that's what zero trust enables us to do. That's what personas enable us to scale. And it's all about effectively how you say it and moving it forward. And speaking of how you say it, it is not just what you say. It is exactly how you say it. To be effective in security, we have to challenge ingrained thinking and biases that shape our decisions. If you think long back to when security became a separate discipline, we cling to familiar paths, double down on past choices, and resist uncertainty, often missing critical risks. So we need to start reframing around the fear or the risk exposure around enablement. We can't be that department of immediate no. It needs to be the department of, well, what are the options that are disposed and how can we get creative on evolving processes and being real creative entrepreneurs? We don't want to favor what we've already believed or what we've thought has always worked. This means understanding where you need to stop over investing in legacy tools, legacy processes that don't clearly show the positive results. You also don't want to fall into the sunk cost fallacy that you've spent too much. We can't stop spending now because we've already spent a few $1,000,000 in a current platform capability or process or even an organizational structure. Everything is on the table to retool and re-evangelize your organization. We also need to stop ignoring failures and only focusing on success. You can't say that you've never been breached, so our approach works. It's quite possible that you just don't have all the right data points to know where all the information is going. So how do we tie this all into zero trust adoption and scale AI by reframing how we show up, how we be transparent? It's all about nudging for secure behavior, right? Single prompts, making sure that we tie the why in every one of our conversations. Use positive framing such as building resistance and resilience, enforcing controls, making security easy to use by default, anchoring to milestones and celebrating those little wins along the journey, and creating feedback loops to understand what's working, what's not working well, and setting up touch points as you're building forward and not having to reinvent the entire wheel. The bottom line is that bias-aware strategies plus these behavioral nudges help us build a stronger security culture and have a higher chance for zero trust adoption. Let's also take another example about implementing this in practicality. Another one is this whole notion of irrationality and human motivation. It's quite interesting. If you think about some of the things that you're most proudest in life, three things, for example, just think about those for a second. Don't say them out loud, just think. How many were accompanied by moments of joy, by moments of tears, agony, complexity, and joy? In general, people think about, some of the most things that they were proud of were not just moments of laughter, whether it was starting a company, writing a book, having kids. No. They don't think about the happiness. Most of those were the most difficult, complex, and painful points in lives. They're more like hiking Mount Everest than sitting on a beach, relaxing. Human motivation is incredibly irrational. It's always the most difficult efforts in which we get the greatest joy and satisfaction. But we struggle applying that to information security. Embarking on a journey of zero trust adoption to fulfill and support personas and artificial intelligence, it's no easy task, right? That's what makes it so gratifying by doing the right work up front, using the right techniques and applying different conversations, depending on the audience that you're working with, to scale and move your initiatives forward. That's where the real joy and satisfaction and enrichment comes from. We love things that are complex, difficult, and challenging. We love helping others. Heck, there's even some of us out there that like running marathons. But when you dig in and think about changing something to evolve a behavior, like traditional zero trust and applying it to AI, it's going to be a long road. And let's dial this back. Fairness and asks matter. Feeling proud about accomplishments matter. Being connected and to managers and teams matter a lot. Human motivation is not a subjective experience. If you feel like you're being treated unfairly, I don't care if the objective metrics show that you're being treated fairly. I care about what you feel. We need to build that empathy with others. The point I'm trying to get across is that we're investing in tools. We invest in calling out others. We invest in saying the sky is falling. We talk about how inefficient it is to not do things the correct way. We should be thinking about the actual delivery and the actual outcome. So it's putting it all together. Again, communicate differently. You got to get people's attention. You have to drive it to their incentives and what motivates them. Discuss the benefits, the facts, build a notion towards positivity in the joint impacted outcomes, and show them how we're going to make it simple through security by design. That's where the joy and beauty and benefit of zero trust is, by taking the identity, the data, applications, assets, services, grounded with that identity and driven through a persona that understands business context. We actually then need to coach and educate others on how we're changing the thought notion, the paradigm thinking, because this is a radical shift from historical approaching of control enforcement, policy enforcement. And at certain times, your business partners, even if you have good relationships with them, are going to be thinking that you're speaking Greek to them. So we have to be very gracious. We have to coach, educate, use data to back up what we're doing, and introduce it in ways that are going to be receptive to how they think. Lastly, you want to be very transparent in showing scorecards, health cards, or metric updates on how you're achieving those initial goals, whether it's supporting the rapid enablement and velocity of artificial intelligence or agentic AI initiatives. You also want to make sure that you're helping to showcase how you're enabling the business achieve its objectives by all of the efforts that you're doing with information security. I commit you will be able to secure your necessary funding if that's what you desire to help scale some of these, as long as you can connect the dots and start small and grow. The Death Star wasn't built in one day. So you need to have your eye on the long-term prize. I mean, Chris, do you want to take us home and wrap it up?
Sure. Yeah, I appreciate it, Robin. To me, the zero trust aspect of this truly is foundational, right? If we look at how we're going to manage our programs in general, AI specifically, we need to look at the zero trust pieces of it as well. So, I did ask Yoda a little bit ago what he thought about AI, and I'll let you read the quote here. But at the end of the day, AI is not something we can just run away from. We can't be a Darth Vader and have a death grip on it. We need to understand the risks. We need to weigh that with the value, and we need to help our business users get to where they need to go by looking at how they function, what their persona is in that organization, so that they can make a true difference. We should and can be partners. And that's cliche. We say that a lot, but that is how we need to act. So I hope you found this valuable. Rob and I are more than happy to continue this conversation. Reach out to us. We've got some contact information here. We hope you enjoy the rest of the summit today, and we're looking forward to hearing from you, and I appreciate you joining us. So thank you very much.